Since the late 90s, Shawn Tuma has been working with legal departments and security teams at the intersection of law and technology. This has given him a unique perspective for how these important defenders work well together and do not work well together, and what a difference that can make with how their organizations manage cyber risk. This led him to write a book called the GC+CISO Connection to help start a dialogue and strengthen the partnership between these critically important roles. The next step is to bring together people who understand these roles to share their experiences and continue the dialogue. Because none of us have all the answers, it is through conversations like these that we can all improve how we work together to improve cyber resilience. This is the GC+CISO Connection Show.
Hi, and welcome to the GC+CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. Today, we have two very exciting guests joining us, two legal badasses, I might say, good friends of mine who I've known for many years. We've worked together and spoken together at conferences and all that good stuff. And so I'll start from my right, my farthest right, with Nicola Hobeiche, and then Shereen El Domeiri. I get that right?
You got it right.
Very good. Okay, so thank you both for joining us today. And Nicola, if you will, I'm going to start with you. Tell the listeners just a little bit about your background, what you do in your current daily job, and how that really impacts the conversation we're going to have here about security and legal working together.
Sure. So I have 20 years of in-house experience. I've spent a lot of time dealing with cybersecurity, incident response, working with different teams across our organizations for the different companies that I've worked for. Currently, I am still a generalist, although I would say I have a specialty in privacy, starting to develop the AI piece, and still really enjoy cybersecurity, although thankfully it's not as needed in my current role as it has been in past roles. And I'm also the co-host of a podcast with Shereen, and I'll let her talk about that.
So, yeah, and we're going to get to that in just a second, actually, because I'm going to want y'all both to tell me about it. But, so, Nicola, you're an in-house attorney, and Shereen, you're like me, we're out-house attorneys, right? Or
well, now,
outside
yes,
attorneys.
outside
I think
now.
people
Yep.
sometimes think of us as out-house attorneys.
I like in-house, out-house.
You have significant experience in-house as well. So.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I started in the government, and actually, back in the day when e-discovery had to get really knowledgeable about how, technology worked and how we could do things. And then I was in-house up until basically the pandemic, and then decided to go out and provide some of the support that I was doing in-house, meeting with cross-functional teams with smaller companies and helping them set up their foundations so that they could, they were ready to grow once they hit all those regulations. So that's what I'm doing now as outside counsel.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So which one of you are going to tell us about Counsel Brew, your podcast?
Oh, definitely Shereen.
Okay, Shereen, get after it.
Get after it. So we started a podcast earlier this year called Counsel Brew, and it was basically, I've been on this entrepreneurial journey, as I was telling you, and some fabulous women who suggested, maybe you want to start a podcast. And I was listening to a few where they are highlighting stories of different types of people. And I said, well, we could probably do that for the legal profession. So, and some others that we've encountered along the way. So that is basically how it got born out of just wanting to share more stories. Here at the Dallas Bar, we highlight a few really great lawyers every year, but there are so many more and so many more stories that we wanted to share. So that's why we started the podcast. And we're having a great time learning more about people that we know and meeting some folks that we don't know as well, and hearing their journeys have been really inspiring.
That's really cool. So, Nicola, how do we find Counsel Brew?
Anywhere where you download your podcasts. And also, we're all over social media, growing organically, but at a steady pace. So it's been really fun to start having people bring it up in conversations or share something that they've heard on an episode. And if I had to give my elevator pitch of it, I would basically say it's, exploring people's paths to badassery and the trials and tribulations that have come along with it. And I think
It's like a coffee chat.
it's like a
Yeah,
coffee chat.
And I love that. I've enjoyed listening, especially the one with Dina also.
Yes.
I mean, it's a lot of fun because that's the whole point of all this is the conversations. And that's what we're trying to do here is have a conversation that's a little more focused on a subject matter, which is, in particular, how legal teams and security teams work together and how they can get better at working together. So, Nicola, I know you have some thoughts that you've been giving to this. Can you just start off? Tell us what you think about this issue. Is it important? Is it something we need to focus on?
It is definitely important. I would say it actually applies across all the organization, especially as in-house counsel. But, depending on your specialty and which teams you're paired with, I think you have to be really thoughtful about how you build relationships. So, it's not just waiting for the client to come to you with work. And I think that's true for outside counsel, too, as you become trusted guides and trusted partners. I think you have to be anticipating your client's needs, which means also getting to know them. And there's some fun ways that have been effective for me that I've been able to do that, in particular with my IT and security teams. So, for example, in 2 of my prior jobs, I would actually go sit with the teams. I would step away from the legal team and actually go office for the day or 2 days. And you'd be surprised how quickly they forget you're there. So then they sort of revert back to their ordinary selves. So then you get a really nice glimpse of what their day-to-days look like. And then when they do realize you're there, sometimes, I would get hit with a Nerf gun. I don't know if they were aiming it at me or if I just was in the line of fire, but
I bet they were aiming at you.
I think they were aiming at me too. But I think it was a really nice way to sort of disarm them and not think of me as the lawyer in the room, but to see me as a partner. And so when we did have to have conversations about things that were up and coming, we were already connected in a way that you can't do, when you just sit behind your legal desk and remotely join in on their team meetings if you can't be there in person.
And, and I mean, in my experience, there's a whole spectrum of how we see legal and security work together. The really good companies and the really good teams have really good relationships.
Yeah.
But a lot of the breach work I do, ironically, we find they don't have a very good relationship. And of course, I think that has something to do with it many times is they're not working together proactively. So then that's why they end up in that position many times. But, one of the things that I always find interesting are people's personalities. And when you look at the nature of lawyers, I mean, we can sometimes have this facade or ego or whatever. The legal profession, who would have imagined, right?
Right.
We put our suits on.
But security can be the same way.
Oh, for sure.
And
For sure.
I think part of that is because we're kind of on islands. We're defending against risk in an organization when there aren't a whole lot of other people doing that same thing. And I think that's such a great idea of just being goofy with them, like letting them see.
Yeah, I feel like you have to be approachable. And maybe what we haven't shared yet is Shereen and I have actually worked together 4 different times in our professions.
Whoa,
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, sometimes she was the boss, sometimes I was the boss, sometimes we were co-counsel together. So we've had a lot of fun in our careers. And there was one organization in particular where we worked side by side, and we both have goofy sides. So it was really great to have them see us.
Anything about that.
It was really great for them to see us just as people and just, not stiff lawyers that were just going to, basically dissect anything that they were telling us. We were really focused on trying to understand what their needs were, priorities, things like that, and to encourage them to come seek us out early in the process.
Yeah, I have to say I was definitely the benefit of Nicola's relationship building, coming into one of those organizations. And then when we had to do the hard work of actually building a real data security plan, being invited to all those meetings, like it wasn't an afterthought, right? They had already put us in, made sure we had those meetings, and included me and asked a lot of questions like, does this flow make sense? Who do we have to escalate to? So I thought that was really helpful.
And you mentioned like building a data security plan and things like that. And I know both of you work in privacy and cyber a lot. One of the issues I see is I'll talk to people in legal or security about what I do as a cyber lawyer, privacy lawyer. And they're like, oh, okay, well, if we ever have a breach, we'll call you. And I'm like,
it's a little late.
There's more to this legal security thing than just if you have a breach or you get sued. Like y'all, and I know, I mean, y'all did a talk at the in-house counsel conference a few years back on building these programs. But give us some examples of like real life stuff that legal and security teams can work together on.
I think you have to have really sort of a triangle. You have to have a really strong communications plan. You have to make sure that you have the protocols in place if you have an incident or a breach. I think you have to have mapped out, who's in charge in those situations. And so I think of it as preparing for a performance or like you're going to be on stage, because basically when a breach or an incident happens, right, it's very likely you'll end up in the public. And so it is how are you going to show up for that, and are you prepared? And so if you rehearse once, you probably will have a few things go wrong that you were not anticipating. It doesn't look as polished, right? But if you prepare you actually choreograph it, you think through who's doing what roles, you understand how you interconnect together, you're going to have a better experience, and it's going to be, I don't want to say when you're going in the public that it's a performance. That's not the case at all, right? But showing up and being prepared and how you're going to handle it and communicate is so essential. And so I think by the time I pick up the phone to call one of you two, I should be able to hand over to you a very nice package of here are our policies, here's our protocol, here's our plan, here's the next steps we want to take. And frankly, have you on I always joke about the bat phone.
Yeah.
Or the bat signal, right? Like you're the number that's on there. If I don't know anybody else's phone number, I know your number. So if I need it, it's there. Yes.
To get started. And I mean, I had a prospective client ask me this morning, well, do you ever do anything other than full day tabletops? Like, absolutely.
Yeah, all day long.
Like, there was a time when all we did were tabletops. And I was like, by the way, you know what a tabletop really is? It's practice. We use these words, but it's practice. We're practicing. We're preparing. I said, I've never once had a real incident response where we were all seated in the conference room with lunch delivered and we dealt with it for a full day. It's always someone's over here, let's see if we can get a Zoom meeting or Teams or connect ourselves or whatever and figure out this problem in a minute's notice. So Shereen, what are your thoughts on that? And then what are your thoughts on other areas, like even from contracts or compliance or things of that nature?
I was going to say I start probably way further back, especially in my role now where I'm helping smaller businesses to start thinking about this from the beginning, right? So it's so much easier to build a data plan if you don't have a bunch of data. So please think about it, because once you are thinking about it, you can put structures in place. You will know where your data is. You'll know what you're using it for. You'll know who has access to it. And I think it'll be a lot easier when an incident like this happens to hopefully contain it. But also just that relationship building that we were talking about earlier is getting in and actually rolling up your sleeves and then not being afraid to ask the stupid question, like that was a technical IT term. Like, I don't know what that means. Can you explain to me what that means? And then vice versa, when there's, when we're talking legal speak, for us to be able to make that connection and explain to them why we're asking these questions or why this is important in the scheme of things. So, and then of course, there's a whole management system that goes in place with that, right? So it's not just policies and procedures and training, right? It comes into effect in all of your contracts. So that's something I do now, is review all these technical contracts and help companies with their vendor management programs, the assessments, understanding what the question is asking, which sometimes is not that easy depending on which platform you use. Clearly not written by lawyers in some instances. And then what the responses are, and then where you put that on the risk level, right? And which vendors do I have to ask more questions from? Or, when something happens, who are the four, whatever, the handful that you're going to have to go to first that has the most data and could potentially be involved in helping you resolve the situation.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about a lot is contracts, because people they want to, what are the legal issues of cyber? And it's like, well, it starts with your contracts. Yeah. You have more contracts writing cyber law and privacy law every day than the legislatures will ever write. People don't think about that. They don't think about how many they enter, all the varied obligations, and how do you prepare an incident response plan if you don't know who you have to notify or when or how?
Contracts are relationship documents, right? So if you don't know what that document says, then you don't know what your relationship is when that situation occurs. So yes, there's a lot of shifting of liability. There's a lot of different responsibilities in those contracts, and some organizations have templates and have ideas of what they want that to look like. And of course, like any contract, it depends on who you're bargaining with, what those look like, and then knowing who the outliers are. And then of course, it also goes back to the data situation. Like, what are you actually sharing with them? Why? And how is that benefiting the organization? And then if you do have any type of breach with a vendor, you should also question what's going to happen if there's a data breach, right? So something to always think in the back of your mind of how these relationships grow. And a lot of times we're talking about multi-year contracts, right? So if year one is kind of crappy, you might want to cut your losses and start over and find another vendor who can help you versus waiting through the whole contract and potentially finding yourself in a bigger pile of whatever.
But I think that's also why it's super important to do the early getting to know each other and actually breaking down what you're bringing to the table and what they're bringing to the table, and not them, the other side, them, your internal partner.
Yeah.
And appreciating, there's a lot of different terminology on both sides of the house. So if you can take the time to ask, well, to Shereen's point, actually acknowledge, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've said that multiple times in meetings. And I've said it unabashedly because in order for me to do a good job, I have to be able to understand what they're talking about, including asking for diagrams. Hey, can you draw that out for me? I think I understand this. Is this what you meant? Oh, no, Nicola, you forgot this piece of it. Let's draw that in. And finding a way that you're able to connect and share the information so that you're working from the same place, so that when they use a term, when you are in a crisis, right, that you already understand what their meaning is and you can assign the right meaning, which also means I'm then a better partner to you because I'm able to tell you, oh, in this situation, when they say this, that's what this means. Mm-hmm. And so then we're able to make better informed decisions and provide the advice they need to navigate through it.
Yeah, the terminology is something that I think can really be a challenge for all of us. Those of us on the legal side, we have our own terminology, our own acronyms and our own, with Latin phrases and stuff that to us, we can sit here and talk about all day. But then you have people on the security side, those of us in security have our own terminology, or the IT, the hard IT, deep IT side. And bridging those gaps means we do have to ask those questions. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Tell me, explain that to me. What is a data map? The biggest one right now is, what is a risk assessment? Because a risk assessment can mean so many different things depending on who the audience is, or a data breach.
Well,
right?
Even the term success can, like thinking through what looks like success to your IT team and your InfoSec teams compared to what looks like success to the legal team can be very different. So when you're practicing and you're having the conversations together early on, you can view success as different things, but it's important to understand the lens which they're coming through so that you can continue to fine tune and actually get to a point where success is the same thing, which at the end of the day is to protect the organization and protect your customers and right, like you're thinking through, but what that's supposed to look like. But success could be, we fixed this that, was maybe broken or where the incident occurred. But that's not necessarily what success is for the legal team, which is we know everything that might come after that.
Yeah,
So I think even just something as simple as that is key.
I think so also. Yeah, Shereen?
I think one thing that we haven't really touched on is like how important this is for the entire organization to understand. Like this is not just legal and IT's job, right? Like, yes, we are the core team to make sure that everything's working, ensuring that we're treated as team members, right? I think that goes back to the language, what are we doing? But I think things that are really important are, do we have support from the top? And does everybody in the chain understand why certain policies are in place and understand why we have to do things a certain way? And if they have questions, who do they go to? And it's okay if you're suspicious of everything. Like I'd rather have somebody who's suspicious of everything and me tell them, no, that's okay, versus somebody who will never come and talk to us. And anybody in that chain, right? Your manager, the C-suite, your IT team, anybody in the chain should be open door for the organization, for members of the organization to come and understand why they have to treat data a certain way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, kind of elevating the discussion in the organization, because there are two questions that I hear a lot that I want to ask y'all about. One is how CISO reporting, like who do they report to, the structure, and who communicates cyber risk to the board? Like y'all got a lot of different varied experience in different roles. What are your thoughts on how reporting normally works and how it should or could work better?
I think it has to be legal and the CISO partnering and showing up together. Even if you only have one voice, right? Or one representative that's doing all the talking, I think it has to be prepared for together to make sure that you have, continuity in the messaging, and also that it's being delivered in a way that the board will interpret it the way that it needs to be interpreted. In other words, if you just come with a bunch of legal and technical jargon that you may have.
Here's our pen test result from da-da-da,
right.
This intrusion, da-da, all that.
Not helpful, but if you take both legal and the technical, the InfoSec piece of it, right, and you're taking both those perspectives and you're marrying it together and then you're putting it in a straightforward way that the board can digest it, that's much more effective. I also think it builds a lot more trust with the board because they see the cohesiveness, can't say it. It's my turn today, Shereen. Of the teams working together, and it builds more trust and confidence in them in the organization.
In that role, do you see an active conversation between, say, the CISO and the board, like back and forth, like a discussion, or is it more of a presentation type?
I think it has to be a conversation, and I think there has to be coaching. I think that the CISO needs to be coaching the GC, and the GC needs to be coaching the CISO, so that together, how are you receiving this information? How are you understanding it when I talk about this? And then together, you start to formulate what is a clean, straightforward way to present the information. That's useful, and that will actually get the board talking and thinking about what are the next steps and to ask thoughtful questions. If you do I like visuals. I'm a visual learner, so I think a visual is always great. But your board is very different than trying to explain it to your CEO, than trying to explain it to your employees, than trying to explain it to the public. Each audience needs a different delivery.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Shereen, tell us.
My thoughts were, it kind of depends on the industry and what regulations apply of what that reporting structure looks like, right? So in highly regulated entities, you have a much stronger, I would say, organizational structure and how those things are set out and what the expectations are. And, of course, there are legal ramifications for not doing it, right? So if you're an SEC regulated entity, like you need to be following the rules and have really good plans because those penalties can be very high. I'm dealing with a lot smaller companies at this point in time, so they probably don't have a dedicated CISO. So I'm always like, who is this person, right? Who's my C-suite person? Who's my compliance person? Who really understands the security? And then do the other people, especially like these tech startups, right? Like there's 5 people. And I'm like, do all 5 of you understand what's going on here? Because if something happens, all of you guys are going to be contacted. And so you need to choose who your point person is. Do they understand how to communicate? Have you thought about this plan? And then who is the person who actually I need to contact and work through to fix the problem?
Yeah. I mean, I love that point you made about the differences in the size of companies, the nature of the work they do, their industries, their complexity, because I think that's part of the problem we have is everybody comes out and says, you should do this, you should do it this way, right? As though we all have all the answers. But the reality is everyone is different at some level. And that's why I love having the perspectives, and when we were talking earlier, like with your government perspective, y'all working together in larger, more complicated, complex organizations, and then working with smaller companies and startups, you can't take what fits one and try to say we're going to do this in the others.
I really have not been. I've been able to carry over themes with each organization, but the needs of all my organizations I've worked for have been different every single time. So I can build on my experience and take the things that worked well and try different techniques, but I have to adapt them as I move between companies to make sure that it fits what they need. And frankly, having a CISO is actually pretty exciting because not all, to Shereen's point, not all organizations actually have them, which makes me think too, I think the other key thing for in-house counsel and external counsel as our partners is to be identifying gaps and things that are missing. And I think because for in-house counsel, we get very busy in what we're doing and we're responding to other needs, we don't necessarily always have the time to be proactive and think through what are the things we need to do to be prepared and to make it very seamless. And so taking that time and actually talking to your internal teams and finding out, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you need this? Have you thought about this? Can I be part of that conversation? Can also be really key in helping prepare. And I think a lot of times legal thinks of themselves as the business will come to us when they need something. And that's really not what that is. That's probably more true for outside counsel, but that is not true for in-house counsel. We should constantly be proactive and asking questions and finding a way to do it that it's not, doesn't feel like an attack on the business, right? You're there to help. So that when you ask the question, you also have things to offer and solutions to put forward and that you're willing to do it with them.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So the other issue that I hear a lot of questions about is the issue of CISO liability, and the concerns that we've seen over in recent years with the Uber situation and then SolarWinds, and then questions on coverage under insurance, like coverage under D&O insurance or whatnot. Have y'all experienced any of these questions, or do you have any thoughts on what CISOs or in-house counsel can do to help assuage, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Some of these concerns, that's a big word.
That's a good one.
Where I found it, but
SAT word.
Yeah. So how do we help each other overcome this concern?
I think as in-house counsel, you have to know your insurance policies, and these are things that you need to be connected to your broker. If it's another team in the organization that is creating, looking at the policies annually, and it's not sitting with legal. Legal still has to be part of it and looking to understand what those terms are. I think if you're hiring someone, it's important to talk about that in the interview and be upfront about what you have, what you don't have, and then you should be aligning the salary with the exposure that comes with those positions. I don't know that always happens or that the salaries are there to be offered, but I think when you're coming into it, you definitely should know what you're stepping into from an exposure perspective, and also understand if something were to happen, how will the organization show up for you? Because it won't be the first time that someone is under fire, right? And so you want to understand what the expectations are around that.
Yeah. Shereen, you have any additional thoughts?
No, I think you said that beautifully. I think one thing that we didn't touch on is, when we do experience an incident, to have that moment after the dust settles to figure out what went right, what went wrong, and then be able to retool. And that all goes to what we've been talking about is the open doors, the support from your C-suite, and being able to communicate with each other.
Yeah. And so as I expected, our time would fly by today and we could have this conversation forever. But we're nearing the end, so I want to ask each of you if you could give us one tip for our listeners on how, whether they're legal or in cyber, they can better work with their counterpart in the other area. And Shereen, we've been starting with Nicola for everything.
Oh my
so
gosh.
You start on this one.
I was
No
like,
pressure.
let's go have a cup of coffee and get to know each other.
I would say remember to be cool, calm, and collected, really in any situation, and to be approachable. Allow yourself to laugh, especially as in-house counsel, and to just immerse yourself in what their problems are, what their goals are, and understand that, so that when they do come to you or you go to them, you have that relationship foundation that you've already started to build.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both very much. This has been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on the GC+CISO Connection Show. And make sure you go find our friends Nicola and Shereen's Counsel Brew podcast, because I think you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of that one as well. So thank you very much.